Iran. Iran was brought into the Cold War over one thing. The biggest thing in the Cold War, really, at least in the Middle East, was oil. If you know, the Middle East is rich with oil, natural resources, and everything. It's everywhere. But before I get into that, let's get some background information and which years I'm gonna be talking about. So, Iran's location is the Middle East, of course, and in the time period I am going to discuss today, they are in a revolution without a stable government, and their president, per se, is a dictator. And in the year 1978, which is where I'm going to focus, they had 35,977,589 million people. So, but let's cut to the chase. So 1946 to 1945, which is the big setup for the revolution and how Iran is affecting the Cold War, which is what I'm going to discuss. Russia, Britain, and the United States. They were discussing on who gets oil or who gets how much oil. And this led to a lot of issues. Russia had came up with the idea that Britain and the US were plotting to kick out Russia and just take oil for themselves. So Russia, in return, put in troops in Iran. And the US didn't like that whatsoever. So they called up the United Nations and complained. The United Nations ended up telling Russia, you have till May 2nd to get all troops out of Iran. But Russia didn't do it. Instead, what Russia did do is they struck a deal with Iran that would allow the Russian troops to evacuate, not per se, in exchange for oil. But in April 1946, when Russian troops did leave, Iran had backfired on that deal and refused to give oil. Russia, with no oil and no troops in Iran, would not send any back to avoid any conflict with the US or the British. Alright, but let's jump forward a couple years now. 1953. So in 1953, the US and British intelligence had came to a conclusion that Iranian leader Mohammad Mossadegh had been leading towards communist ideals, and the only way to stop him would be to overthrow his government. But right before they were going to commence the operation, the Iranian leader had found out about the coup and had called the public to protest against these actions, which forced Britain to leave, but the CIA, aka the American Central Intelligence Agency, continued to find another way to overthrow the government. They were able to do it with the support of the Iran military and pro-Shah protesters. After that, the Shah was reinstated into power and signed away 40% of the oil fields to America as a deal. Later on, in the Cold War, this had made them a key ally to the US. And a couple years later, with the Shah reinstated, there was going to be issues. The Middle East was starting to turn communist because that's the only way they would survive without being overtaken by the neighboring countries. And Iran has started to see social and economic changes within the past 2 decades, give or take. In 1960s, the oil prices rapidly went up. And that was really setting up the anti-government protests pretty soon. And with the Middle East slowly becoming communist, the Kennedy administration and the Shah were worried and had ordered counter-revolutionary measures so that the Shah would become in power for the majority of his lifetime. But they are still alarmed by Khrushchev's diagnosis, which stated the regime of Iran will fall like a rotten apple. This and the fact that multiple Middle East countries were turning communist had pushed Iran to do social reforms in 1977, which would be the following. Number one, land reform. Number two, nationalization of forests and pastures. And there's a bigger list, but these are some of the bigger ones. But arguably the biggest reform would be number 5, which states reform of electoral law to include women. And if anyone wonders why this is such a big thing, why it's such a big deal, it's for the fact that Iran was a notorious strict country on women's rights due to religion. They couldn't show themselves, they couldn't really have any opinion. They stayed home, cleaned the house, husband did the work, and they were just a maid. And with this new reform, this new law, allowed women to get a say in what's going to happen politically in the government. And that's a pretty big thing, and it's a key changer to modern day history. But that's another topic. They also started to give free education, allowing people to finally get the education that they deserve, more human rights. The land reforms were a key part also, because this would allow the peasantry to regain land that they had lost before. But still, there was a revolution. And it was mainly because people were just thinking that the United States was finding a way to gain and destroy Iran's economy. So, but on top of that, there was political changes, which were honestly a big contribution. The people that were anti-government groups did not agree with the foreign country, also known as the United States, to be controlling the government, and it became a fight into national independence. But the bigger issue than that was the Shah became a dictator. Not immediately, but slowly. He wouldn't really let people help him in decision making. And following in the footsteps of any dictator in history, he made a secret police group which controlled the major responsibility for social and political stability. And the people planning to revolt, they wanted to, but the Shah made a deal to hold him back, with allowing the opposition to make political decisions which had worked well until they made the mistake of asking if they could bring back Mohammad Mossadegh. And in doing so, the Shah had all National Front leaders arrested, and soon realized there was no form of peace with the opposition. And hastily, he made social and political reforms to have a better grip on what is in the media, and secret agencies were informed. And soon, all segments of society in Iran were under political supervision and control. And this had caused the people to revolt in 1978 through 1979 and to overthrow the Shah in the year 1979.